I'm starting on the left side of the carburetor for the 1984 Yamaha TT600. This is going to be the tough side. This is probably where all of the action takes place. I've already cleaned out the outside, just sprayed it with some carburetor choke cleaner just to get the big chunks of debris and stuff off of there. And my plan is just to take off one section at a time, clean it, run the carburetor cleaner fluid through it, put it back together so I don't have a whole bunch of parts laying around here that I have to try and piece back together afterward. A couple of things that I'm going to do just from the outside. This is the drain for the float bowl, so I'm going to pull that screw out and I should be able to clear that out from the outside. Also going to look at this screw here. It's probably one of the fuel air mixture screws. Here's my idle. I don't really need to do anything with that. This earlier I had mentioned was bent. This is actually pretty soft metal, so all I had to do is just put a pair of pliers on there and tweak it back into shape a little bit. But as you'll see if you have one of these, and yours is going to be different than mine, but all of these little ports, they have a small hole down inside of them. And again, I'm going to spray carburetor cleaner fluid through there, and hopefully it'll make its way to where it needs to be. If it comes right out and I don't see it going into one of these other reservoirs or ports, then I'll take a little piece of wire and kind of ream it out and clean it out. I'm not sure you're going to be able to see the detail, but this fuel, or whatever you want to call it at this point that's in here, is actually green, and everything in here's got a film on it. It's tacky. There's no way that this carburetor was going to perform the way it's supposed to. So we're going to tear all of this stuff apart here. Again, this sits like so on the motorcycle. There's a little piston, a little needle in here on a seat, and it moves up and down as the fuel level adjusts in that float bowl to keep your fuel pressure consistent. Probably going to have to remove this pin and then pull all of this stuff off here. Then I can start going through and cleaning out these jets right here. Got green fuel coming out of there. That's not a good sign. This thing's in pretty bad shape, but I'm hoping that after a couple hours here we'll have it all back together and it'll be ready to go. Alright, I'm going to try and get this float out, and it looks like this is slightly tapered on this end, so I think I have to drive this pin back down. So I'm just going to set it up here and kind of support it. See if I can persuade that thing to come out. Let that stuff soak for just a second. So that's the pin I'm trying to get to move. Alright, I'm glad that moved. I wasn't sure if that was supposed to happen, but I couldn't see any other way for that to come out of there. Tricky part's going to be to balance all this. This is really just a solid piece of wire for this pin. It's not a roll pin or anything. And just trying to work slow here so I don't bugger it up. And also I don't want all of this stuff that's part of this float mechanism to fall apart before I get a chance to look at it. Figure out how it goes together. Okay, there we go. And now that I look at it a little closer, it looks like it's actually tapered on both sides. So I don't think it's going to matter which direction it goes back in. Now, as I grab this float and pull it up, you'll see the rest of this float assembly. So as it moves up and down, it controls this little needle here, sits down in that port, and as that float moves up and down, it controls the fuel that goes down into the carburetor. Again, all of this stuff is pretty bad shape. Just needs a good cleaning, I think. So here's what they're starting to look like after a little soak in some solvent and a little brush with a towel, or I like to use old toothbrushes. They get in there and clean these up nice. There's the pin. That looks like everything should rotate on that pretty freely. So I'm going to set those to a side. And the other thing is, when I first pulled out this needle, there's a little spring inside of here, and that wasn't moving one bit, but 30 seconds in some solvent and quick wipe down, and I don't see any reason why that shouldn't work the way it's supposed to. So now I'm just going to keep going through here and clean all that out, take out the parts that I can easily get out. If I can't easily get them out, then I'll work with them in place. So for these small ports right here, I'm just using a wire brush, separating one of the bristles and running it through there. I had one that seemed to be clogged. Of course, they're pretty small, and I haven't torn this thing completely apart, so I'm not sure where that fuel is supposed to go, but least I've cleared all of those from that side. I suspect some of those may come into this area here, and I'm going to pull that plate next. So this screw right here I think is probably an air-fuel mixture screw, and before this motorcycle kind of sat and bit the dust, it was running pretty good. So for this type of screw that I know is not seated all the way, I'm going to try and count the number of revolutions from this screw so that I can hopefully get it back in the same place. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's flush right now, and that's exactly 5 turns. So that's going to be my reference when I put this back together. So I'm going to put this bowl back together before I tear apart any more of this carburetor. And I've got a few things that I've taken apart. This is a jet. This thing was completely clogged, so I ran some carburetor cleaner down through it, and also ran a little wire brush bristle down through those holes. So I've got that clean. That's going to go right down in here. And these are real fine threads, so don't get too aggressive when you're getting everything started. Just get a feel for it, let the threads grab. This one goes all the way, so I don't have to worry about number of turns. Just go until it gets seated. And I'm not going to crank it, just snug it up. Okay? Then in here I've got a needle that is from inside there, and I've cleaned this out. All of those ports right there were plugged up. I'm going to put this back in, and it has an O-ring right there. If that's bad, you'll want to replace that before you put this back together. I'll tighten that by hand, and then this takes an 8mm. Just going to snug that up. Doesn't have to be super tight, like so. And I've got a jet here that sits down in the top of that. That's been cleaned out. That goes in there, and that's a 7mm wrench. I'm just going to snug that up. Now this, I think it's an air-fuel mixture screw here. This had a spring on it. I cleaned that up. It's also got an O-ring on there, so if that O-ring's bad, you'll want to replace that. This is the one where I'm going to try to get it in and set it to the same adjustment that it was at before I pulled it out. So once I get this started, being real careful to make sure I get a feel for it. Okay, that's holding. That's pretty close to flush. I'm going to see if this feels a little better. Nope, that's actually down. So this is flush right here, and I had 5 complete revolutions, and it's going to have the same orientation as it is here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that should be in the same place where it was before I started this. And there's a real small hole right down there, and that's where the needle on the end of that sits, right down inside here. Next thing I got to do is put the float assembly back together. And this little needle and seat sits down in there. And then when I put this together, I have to make sure that I catch this little stem in the bottom of this float right there, where you can see that U-shaped channel. So I could put this in, and I'm going to tilt it just a little bit until I can catch it. There we go. So that when this is assembled and this float is moving up and down, it catches that needle. Now we'll put this pin in, and both sides seem to be equally tapered, so I don't think it's directional. Whoop! Got stuff falling apart from me here. Like so. Put a block underneath there, kind of help me hold things in alignment while I try and get this pin started through the carburetor frame, down through that first hole, through the bowl, and then I've got to get it lined up on the other side here, like so. So just got it started there, and give it a few little taps. Check everything, make sure that everything's functioning before I put that all the way through. If I get that position just right, that pin is on the other side of this block here, so I should be able to finish driving it. And then I'm just going to have it so that it's equally spaced on both sides. You can see how that needle is working. And again, that's all upside down. This is how it sits on the motorcycle, and as that fuel level in that float bowl changes, that moves up and down. So we've got everything together. The only thing I have left over is the actual bowl, and it has to go like so. When I run these screws down, I'm just turning the screwdriver. I'm not pushing it in there so that I can make sure that the threads are engaging. Pretty sure I wouldn't be able to find a replacement carburetor for a motorcycle this old. So I don't want to damage this. Going to alternate here. Just snug these up equally. Now, of course, there was a gasket or a rubber ring that went all the way around that. If that thing was bad, then you'd want to replace that as well. And ultimately, you might have to get a carburetor rebuild kit that comes with all the new gaskets and O-rings. Okay, that part's done. Now I'm going to move on to a different area. I've got a plate up here that I can remove, that I can get in there and clean some things out in here as well, and also the choke mechanism. So I pulled off this side plate here, and there really wasn't much to it, so I just got in there and cleaned it with some carburetor cleaner. There's a little spring-loaded ball valve in here, and then there's this port that I sprayed out and had a free flow through here. Now when you take these covers off, hold on to things, don't just unthread them and hope for the best. There are a lot of springs and diaphragms in here, and you want to make sure that you have a chance to kind of see how things go together. There are a few other ports in here that were cleaned out, and most of them didn't have anything blocking them. I see one down in here, so I'm going to shoot a little carburetor cleaner down through there, and out it comes out of here. So that's clear. So now I can put this part back together, and I really only have a couple more things that I need to go through. If you look at this also, if you kind of look at the mechanisms and the parts, you can see that there's a little bit of wear on this side, just in case you don't remember or you don't pay attention to how things go across. Look for wear marks. Kind of help you put things back together, or just give you a little more confidence as you put them back together. So that little diaphragm's got to sit down inside of there. And this is going to be a little bit tricky, a little clumsy. So I've made sure that that little diaphragm is at least sitting on the inside edge here, and there's going to be this spring that sits down on top of that, and on top of that spring is the cover. So now all I have to do is keep it all together. Push it back down on. Give it a quick look, make sure that I don't have that rubber diaphragm sticking out. I don't want to pinch that or break it. And I'll get these screws started. And I'm pushing down with my thumb to keep that spring compressed. Again, I'm just spinning the screwdriver, letting the threads engage. I don't want to force anything. Give it one more quick look, make sure everything looks like it's seated. And just cinch those up like so. So I've torn this top off and cleaned it out. You can see that this really is just kind of where all the controls for the mechanisms are, and I've decided that I'm not even going to attempt to pull out this choke mechanism and clean it, because I can get to everything I need to through these holes. So when I open the choke and spray the cleaner through those, it comes out here into the carburetor. So everything there looks good. I don't remember there ever being any real small jets or anything in that choke mechanism. So I think I am done with this carburetor. I'm just going to put this plate back on. I don't see anything real obvious that I haven't gone through and cleaned out and flushed out. So should be able to get this back on the bike, and then I'll move on to the next part of the project. Thanks for watching. I've got the carburetor back together for the 1984 Yamaha TT600. I replaced the fuel line here, the fuel line here and the fuel line here that connects the right and left sides. I also replaced the filter that goes in between this lid here and the piston, whatever you want to call it, inside of that port right there. This was just a little bit small. I think it had shrank over time and I didn't like the way it fit. I didn't buy a rebuild kit for this carburetor, so I just went down to the auto parts store and I ended up with a whole roll of this. Hopefully I never used the remaining, but I cut a little square out, took a caliper and measured the inside and outside diameter of the seating ring for this gasket that goes inside of there. Cut a new one out, put everything together. Everything seems to work really well. All the actions are smooth. All of the ports were cleaned out with wire brushes and carburetor cleaner. This was straightened out so that I've got a better alignment for the cables coming off the throttle. So I think everything should be good on this, and I'm just going to put it back on the bike and then I can move on to another part of the equation on this restoration or rebuild.